We all remember Final Fantasy X, right? And whether we like it or not, its sequel, X-2. It's hard to forget. It was the first Final Fantasy to continue an existing story rather than start fresh, but in the West, it proved to be incredibly divisive. The drastic tonal shift caught many off guard, and let's be honest, Square practically tricked an entire generation of edgy Western gamers into playing what felt like a hyper-feminized J-pop fever dream. It was less an exciting return to Spira and more an exercise in bitter disappointment. But what if I told you the Final Fantasy X story doesn't end here? Oh no. Not only does the dream-turned-nightmare continue beyond X-2, but there is an entire planned and partly existing sequel trilogy of media designed to extend Spira's saga even further. Yes folks, you heard me right, a sequel trilogy! And we all know no one likes sequel trilogies. For better or worse, Final Fantasy X refuses to die, and the further it drifts from its original story, the more fans argue over whether Square should just let Spira rest in peace as more unhinged official content is released. So with that said, hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is the weird story of Final Fantasy X-3, the mysterious, unfinished disaster. Yeah. Many would agree that Final Fantasy X is pure magic. What a great game. Its story, characters and music still linger in players' hearts over 20 years later. Tidus and Yuna's journey through Spira was breathtaking, with a love story that felt like fate itself, and the innovative sphere grid, turn-based combat and hauntingly beautiful soundtrack made every moment unforgettable. Even now it's considered a timeless classic, and Final Fantasy ended up more mainstream than ever before. Thanks to the success of this game, and previous great Final Fantasy games on the PS1, Square was on a high, so it was time for a massive budget feature-length movie, Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. Rather than manage to create something truly amazing that resonated with fans, the film was a massive box office bomb, losing over $90 million and nearly bankrupting the company. So despite in the past sticking to the tradition that every Final Fantasy game should exist as one self-contained story, Square needed a quick and cost-effective way to recoup losses, and a direct sequel to the beloved Final Fantasy X was a perfect solution. X-2 reused assets, the engine, and much of Final Fantasy X's world, significantly cutting development costs while guaranteeing strong sales due to the popularity of its predecessor. This strategy helped stabilize Square's finances, eventually leading to its merger with Enix in 2003. Sure, it broke lots of series traditions, but it was a necessary gamble to keep the company afloat and the first move towards the huge amount of Final Fantasy VII projects we seem to be continuously receiving today. Speaking of Final Fantasy VII, while I am far from X-2's biggest fan, I don't believe all Final Fantasy sequels are bad. In fact, I absolutely adore Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and was completely captivated while exploring its beautifully expanded world. Every familiar location felt alive in a way I'd only dreamed of back in the PS1 days, and the sheer attention to detail made revisiting Final Fantasy VII's universe feel like both a nostalgic trip and a fresh adventure. Being one and done with every Final Fantasy story would certainly be depriving us of lots of potential magic. Since I have just brought up this great game, it's probably worth letting you know that not only has the PC version of Rebirth just been released, but by using my affiliate links, I can get you nearly 50% off both Rebirth and Remake. Not just that, but I can hook you up with the X and X-2 double pack for around just $12, as well as big money off of thousands of other games you need to add to your collection. Happy shopping, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this video. Funnily enough, mentioning the Final Fantasy X and X-2 remasters leads us perfectly to what came next, the unexpected expansion of the X universe beyond the duology. The Final Fantasy X X-2 HD remaster was released in 2013 in Japan and 2014 worldwide. This remaster featured enhanced HD visuals, updated character models, reworked textures, and improved lighting effects, making Spira look sharper and more vibrant than ever. It also included a rearranged soundtrack, though players had the option to switch back to the original PS2 music on certain platforms. Content-wise, it was based on the international version of both games. This meant the Final Fantasy X included the Dark Aeons and Pennant super bosses, while X-2 came with the Last Mission Epilogue, a roguelike style dungeon crawler that followed Yuna, Riku and Pain after the events of X-2. However, this is not the post-event we are concerning ourselves with today. Most controversially, the remaster also included Final Fantasy X Will, an audio drama set a year after X-2. a sequel story to the events of the game that many felt was so bad that it ruined Final Fantasy X for them. Essentially, imagine the storytelling in the Star Wars sequel trilogy, but even more baffling and unnecessary. Final Fantasy X Will takes everything wrapped up in X-2's multiple endings and throws it into disarray, with bizarre new plot points, including a forced conflict that feels completely detached from the original themes of the games. It introduces new characters that nobody asked for, messes with established relationships, and worst of all, completely undermines the emotional weight of Tidus and Yuna's journey. Basically, imagine if Return of the Jedi ended with Luke saving the galaxy, only for a follow-up story to reveal that actually, the Empire was never truly defeated. Han and Leia broke up off-screen, and a bunch of random new characters took centre stage instead. Not only did these horrendous ideas come to be, but that's Final Fantasy X Will as well in a nutshell. But wait, there's more, as we would also receive a Japan-only book titled Final Fantasy X 2.5. So let me proceed to spoil your day by talking about the contents of both of these complete nightmares. It's probably worth pointing out that both 2.5 and Will are written by the same person, Kazushige Najima, a scenario writer behind Final Fantasy 7, 8, 10 and 10-2. So none of this is fanfiction, but official canon and part of the story forever. In 2.5, the story picks up right after 10-2's ending, where Yuna and Tidus reunite on Besaid's beach, because obviously we couldn't just leave them happy. Instead, things quickly spiral into baffling nonsense, culminating in the so-called secret ending from 10-2's 100% completion run. Rather than offer any real answers, the novel is deliberately vague, seemingly under the impression that ambiguity equals depth. Instead of expanding on anything meaningful, it decides to fling Yuna and Tidus 1,000 years into the past to a Besaid that barely resembles the one they know, for no particularly well-explained reason. The book is divided into boy's side, Tidus' perspective, girl's side, Yuna's perspective, and boy and girl's, both perspectives. Because why settle for one convoluted structure when you can have three? Oh, and in case that wasn't enough, it also crams in stories from a millennium ago to add even more unnecessary background lore that no one asked for.
I can't believe you've done this.
In the boys' side of the tale, after the famous reunification, Yuna, Tidus and the Gullwings return to the village for what should have been a nice, satisfying conclusion. But no, because Square couldn't resist milking Final Fantasy X even further, things quickly devolve into unnecessary drama. Here Tidus meets Wakka and Lulu's child, Vidina, and he spends some time catching up with the Aurochs, learning that Blitzball has suffered in his absence. As if that's the biggest problem Spira has to face. Meanwhile, Yuna is busy with village elders because naturally she's now a glorified emotional support figure for the confused remnants of the Yevon cult. Then we get the forced introduction of a new priest, Briar, who just so happens to immediately clock that Tidus is from ancient Zanarkand. Besaid has apparently turned into a tourist trap. Yuna is playing therapist, and Wakka is still obsessed with Blitzball because character development is overrated. But I guess he isn't a racist anymore, so that's some development. But wait, it gets worse. Suddenly we're treated to a history dump about Besaid 1,000 years ago, with convoluted lore about summoners, class oppression, robotic AI, because sure, why not, and a completely unhinged war subplot involving Blitzball-shaped bombs and assassins. The cherry on top, a love triangle drenched in melodrama, featuring betrayal and murder, and an attempt to turn a lover into some new kind of summon, a Jushin, because apparently regular Aeons weren't convoluted enough. From all of this, as you can tell, Final Fantasy X's beautifully self-contained story continued to be turned into a never-ending soap opera. In the girl side, the Gullwings airship conveniently breaks down, because apparently we needed yet another excuse to strand characters for false drama. Tidus, now reduced to a clueless bystander in his own sequel, realises Yuna has vanished, just as a storm is about to hit Besaid. He searches for her, only to end up falling asleep in a boat, because that's the heroic thing to do in a crisis. When he wakes up, he finds Yuna steering the boat in the dead of night, dressed in a mysterious white robe, dramatically brooding about how she's ruined everything by dismantling Yevon's teachings. Despite literally saving the world, she now feels guilty for taking away the elderly's spiritual crutch. What an absolute melt. Tidus, of course, disagrees. They argue pointlessly, then make up with Yuna proclaiming that she never wants to leave him. So naturally, disaster strikes immediately after. Lost at sea, they shipwreck on what seems to be an uninhabited version of Besaid, because why not throw time travel into this mess? They stumble across two random statues, one that vaguely resembles Owak of the 23rd, because that is obviously the character we needed lore on, but things only get more ridiculous. Tidus, in true himbo fashion, assumes they've somehow travelled 1,000 years into the past. Instead of processing this revelation, they wander the forest aimlessly, only for a mysterious ball to roll towards them, leading to, in my opinion, the worst part of this entire terrible novel. So brace yourself, because this is insane. Rather than question why a ball would randomly appear in the middle of nowhere, Tidus's blitzball brain kicks in, and he runs straight at it like an excited puppy, only for it to explode, instantly killing him. Yes, really, they wrote this. That's right, this was no blitzball, it was the classic Final Fantasy series enemy, a bomb! What an absolutely humiliating way to go out for such an iconic character, and you thought Luke Skywalker's death was embarrassing. Yuna understandably passes out from the sheer stupidity of what just happened. In her unconscious state, she meets a self-proclaimed god who quizzes her about her relationship with Tidus, because apparently divine beings in Spira have nothing better to do than look after these idiots. Yuna gives an awkward retelling of Final Fantasy X, and in return this god decides to revive Tidus using magic, but with a catch. His death will be conveniently erased from Yuna's memory, though not permanently, because that would be too merciful for the audience. If something triggers it, she might remember the whole ridiculous ordeal, setting up yet more pointless sequel bait. Honestly, this is truly dreadful stuff. Final Fantasy X deserved better. In the boy and girl side, after waking up in a mysterious room that smells suspiciously like a dusty old temple, Yuna and Tidus find themselves in yet another round of Final Fantasy X sequel nonsense. They stumble into what looks like the Besaid Cloister of Trials, but of course it's different, because heaven forbid we revisit anything in the series without it being arbitrarily altered. In the main hall, they come across statues of pre-Yevon gods, because we needed more convoluted lore about deities no one has ever heard of before. Determined to make sense of this fever dream, they leave a temple and meet a frail woman named Kush, who, despite being a walking exposition dump, is not the goddess from the statues, just someone who borrowed the name because why not? She quizzes them on the name of the brightest star in the sky, and when both Yuna and Tidus get it wrong, she evaporates into fireflies, just like a bad RPG side quest NPC. Yuna, now convinced they need to meet another summoner to get back home, hesitates when Tidus senses danger, because she's worried he might also vanish into thin air. Meanwhile, back in the actual Besaid, the villagers are running around in panic because Yuna, Tidus and the Aurochs boat have all disappeared. Waka and a suddenly suspicious Lulu interrogate Briar, the conveniently mysterious new priest, who insists he's just here to do chores and protect the temple from thieves. But when Lulu confronts him about people transforming into fiends while screaming his name, he nervously deflects, which is always a great sign. Later in a classic I'm not the villain I swear moment, Briar reminisces about his tragic past, his murdered wife, his renamed daughter and his long-standing grudge against the Al Bhed. A younger Waka would have certainly loved this big old racist. Upon seeing Shimmer and the Gullwings, to him, Al Bhed grease monkeys, he loses his mind, attempting to attack Shimra, getting knocked out and tied up for his trouble. Turns out, surprise surprise, he's yet another unsent from thousands of years ago, because at this point, who isn't? Back in whatever alternate dimension Yuna and Tidus have been thrown into, Tidus wakes up to find Yuna missing again. He stumbles across Kush, who reveals she is a Jushin, because as stated, regular Aeons just weren't complicated enough. She offers Tidus a deal. She'd give him the power to return home, but only if he kills the Kush from his world. Tidus, being as confused as the audience, accepts without fully grasping what's happening. He then sprints his way back to Besaid using the power of imagination. Yes, really, I said that. The power of imagination. While Yuna, still trapped in this bizarre reality, gets an even longer exposition dump about past summoners, unnecessary world building, and how the island they're on is actually a summon made up of countless faith. Because of course it is. Then comes the obligatory climactic nonsense. Tidus and Yuna finally reunite, hunt down Kush, and plot twist, she's just a beckoning, meaning she was never really alive to begin with. Briar appears, has an emotional reunion with her, and they both conveniently disappear into nothingness, wiping away all of this headache-inducing nonsense as if it never happened. I really wish it didn't happen. With Kush gone, Tidus loses overpowered plot device ability, and Yuna and Tidus return to actual Besaid. And because this train wreck of a story refuses to end, the pair then walk to Xanakin, standing at the same spot where they once shared a heartfelt moment. Yuna turns to Tidus and asks if he's real, because at this point, even she isn't sure anymore. She smiles, prays they can be together forever, and for the sake of all of Final Fantasy X's fans, we could only hope that this was the actual ending. But, oh no, this novel is actually surprisingly good compared to the story-ruining audio drama. Also written by Kashugi Nojima, set 1 year after 10-2 and 6 months after last mission, it decides that what Final Fantasy X really needed was 2 completely new and utterly uninteresting characters, Chumi and Kurgum. Because of course, after 2 entire games exploring Spira and a dodgy novel, what fans were really clamouring for was a couple of randoms we have zero attachment to, hijacking the narrative and dragging us through a painfully unnecessary sequel setup. So before we delve any deeper, I may as well disclose to you who these 2 new characters are. Chumi is a 17-year-old girl who somehow landed a spot on the Spira Council despite having the personality of a self-important teenager convinced she's the main character. She boldly claims to be Auron's daughter because obviously Final Fantasy X desperately needed another false legacy character. She spends most of her time bossing around her so-called friend Kurgum, who thinks he's in charge, but is really just her lackey. To top it off, she's also the narrator, meaning we're forced to experience this unnecessary sequel mess through this girl boss's perspective, because that's exactly what Final Fantasy X fans wanted. Kurgum is Chumi's childhood friend and fellow Spira Council member, though his main role seems to be getting bossed around by her while acting as her doormat. He's a sender, a specialist in guiding the dead to the far plane. He idolizes Yuna and her legendary guardians to the point of borderline fanboying. And if the faith hadn't disappeared after Final Fantasy X, he totally would have been a summoner, because nothing says compelling character development like wishful thinking about a job that no longer exists. Chumi and Kurgum are sent to Besaid by Baralai, a character who was introduced in X-2 to meet Yuna, which basically means forcing themselves into the personal lives of beloved characters who never asked for them. This was Rey Skywalker before Rey Skywalker. On the way, they bump into Tidus, legendary Blitzball star, Dream Boy, and now apparently a worn-down has-been with a limp handshake. This causes our new so-called main character to judge his legendary status. Chumi, ever the observant intruder, immediately notices he's injured and drained, despite his best efforts to pretend otherwise. Because if there's one thing Final Fantasy X needed, it was a story about Tidus getting old and broken. When they finally reach Besaid via the airship, they meet Wakka and Lulu, who take them to Yuna, but instead of continuing as the free-spirited adventuress from X-2, Yuna has reverted to her prim and proper summoner phase, spending her days praying in the temple like the last few years never happened. Naturally, Chumi finds this frustrating. Kurgum, eager to make himself useful, plays a recording for Yuna showing 2 shoe puffs at the Moonflow. This is a big deal because, as we all obviously remember from 10, there was only one left after Sin wiped out the other 30 years ago. But lo and behold, it magically reappeared, leading Yuna to speculate that the creature had been beckoned back into existence. Kurgum insists that Yuna must come to Bevelle and address the Spira Council, but Yuna refuses, because if there is one thing she's learned, it's that listening to bureaucrats never ends well. Chumi, ever the tactful manipulator, decides to play her trump card, mentioning Tidus' injury, which of course immediately gets Yuna's attention. Meanwhile, Lulu, who has no patience for nonsense, calls out Chumi's ridiculous claims of being Auron's daughter. Turns out lots of people have claimed to be the children of Auron, Jecht, and Braska, because Spira is apparently crawling with fake legacy characters. Chumi insists her mother wouldn't have lied, but Lulu shuts her down with some cold hard logic. If Auron had a kid, he would have said something, because the guy might have been gruff, but he was hardly the secretive type. This is a guy who agreed to ride Sin to essentially visit an alternative reality to watch over his friend's son. So him having a kid he didn't mention is certainly, as the young people would say, sus. With their airship conveniently in need of repair, because of course it is, Chumi, Kurgum, Yuna and Wakka are forced to walk to Bevelle. Along the way, they stop at the Moonflow, where they see a crowd gathered around a returning shoepuff. Half the crowd, just Firefly illusions. No big deal until they witness an illusion of a mother talking to her daughter, something illusions aren't supposed to do. Kurgan, in a rare moment of actually trying to do his job, prepares to send them to the far plane, but Yuna stops him, because apparently the moral of this new saga is that death is just a suggestion now. Then, because this sequel nonsense wouldn't be complete without a massive law-breaking disaster, they arrive in Bevale to find that somehow sin has returned. That's right, the very embodiment of destruction that fools Yuna and her friends risked everything to eradicate is back. No explanation, no reason, just beckoned into existence by someone's wish. Which means the entire journey of Final Fantasy X was in hindsight completely pointless. This would be like Darth Vader sacrificing himself to save his son and kill Emperor Palpatine, only for his son to end up dying first and somehow the Emperor returning. How can anyone write stuff this bad? What were they thinking? But little did we know that from here, the Final Fantasy X plot is spat on even more. Realizing that Spira's so-called eternal calm was nothing but a cruel joke, Yuna rushes to meet Tidus. But now Chormi and Kurgan have overheard Yuna referring to Tidus as her boyfriend, only to then eavesdrop on what sounds suspiciously like a breakup. Yuna, in a baffling twist of character regression, is jealous of Tidus' new friend Marvi. Yes, another stupid new character. And instead of addressing anything like an adult, she casually tells him that she doesn't care anymore because she already likes someone else too. When Tidus asks who, she simply says, "Someone you don't know," and walks off, because passive-aggressive melodrama is totally in character for Yuna. Then comes another twist no one asked for. Kurgan decides to ditch Chormi, because he's in love with Yuna. Yes, really. He claims it's something only summoners can understand, leaving Chormi both angry and confused, though she should probably just be relieved she no longer has to play third wheel to this absurd love triangle turned love square. With Kurgan now Yuna's new tag-along, Chormi gets stuck, returning to Besaid with Tidus, where he asks Lulu about Yuna's supposed new love interest. Lulu, in her usual cryptic, bitchy goth fashion, tells him to figure it out himself. She then casually drops the realization that if people can beckon back old memories, then sin returning shouldn't be surprising at all. Oh, for fuck's sake. Which of course is exactly what fans wanted to hear. Confirmation that the stakes of Final Fantasy X was all utterly meaningless. As if things couldn't get any more ridiculous, Yuna, who just moments ago was breaking up with Tidus, suddenly delivers a dramatic speech in a packed stadium, proclaiming that she will defeat Sin again. Yes, that's right, she will make Spira great again. Because apparently her character arc wasn't wrapped up enough the first two times, and Square just couldn't resist undoing everything in favour of rehashing the same conflict all over again. And so, in the grand tradition of unnecessary sequels, Final Fantasy X will manages to simultaneously ruin character relationships, cheapen the original game's story, and somehow make X-2 look like a masterpiece in comparison. So, as you can tell from all of this, both the novel and the audio drama, or more specifically the audio drama, no matter how poorly, seem to have clumsily laid the groundwork for Final Fantasy X-3. After all, Final Fantasy X still has a massive fandom. The original game sold exceptionally well, and even the X-2 HD remaster raked in solid numbers. From a commercial standpoint, a new installment would make perfect sense in some ways. The problem, the actual setup for this hypothetical X-3 is about as well constructed as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Instead of a natural continuation, we've been handed a convoluted mess of unnecessary new characters, lore dumps that contradict everything, and a baffling storyline that undoes the entire point of Final Fantasy X's original ending. But sure, let's bring back Sin again, throwing yet another existential crisis for Yuna, and pretend Tidus running straight into an exploding blitzball was a stroke of brilliant writing. At the very least, the stakes are high, because after all this setup, Square Enix has managed to put themselves in a position where they either have to deliver a Final Fantasy X-3 that justifies this nonsense, or more likely they let the entire thing fade into obscurity while hoping fans quietly forget they ever attempted this in the first place. In a 2021 interview with Famitsu, key developers were asked about the possibility of Final Fantasy X-3, and while they didn't outright confirm anything, they certainly dangled the idea just enough to keep fans speculating. Character designer Tetsuya Nomura, because of course he's involved, revealed that a synopsis does exist, written by scenario writer Kazusugi Nojima. Oh dear, oh dear. The good news is though that this supposedly world-shattering plot is currently sleeping, which is a polite way of saying they have no idea what to do with it and are probably hoping people forget about it. The developers made it clear that while X-3 is technically possible, it won't even be considered until after the Final Fantasy VII Remake project is finished. Which, given how Square Enix loves to stretch things out, means we'll be lucky to see it before the PlayStation 7 comes out. In other words, it's yet another classic case of, yes, we could do it, but we won't commit to actually making it happen. So for now, Final Fantasy X-3 exists in the same limbo as Square's other abandoned ideas. Just enough to tease fans and generate buzz, but not enough to actually mean anything. Which is probably for the best, considering the absolute train wreck of lore they'd have to untangle just to justify it. Don't forget I can get you nearly 50% off both Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Remake, but that's not all. I can also hook you up with Final Fantasy X, X-2 Double Pack for just $12, plus massive discounts on thousands of other must-have games for your collection. Whether you're revisiting classics or diving into something new, this is your chance to grab them for a steal. Just don't go listening to any cursed audio dramas that come with any of them. Just let the games speak for themselves. Happy shopping and cheerio.